Hi, everyone. Before the episode begins, I just want to remind you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Marlene the Plant Lady and YouTube, Everything Gardening with Marlene Simon. And remember, please, please, please rate and review on iTunes and Spotify. That just helps the podcast get noticed by more people, and then more people will become better gardeners. And that's what we all want. So enjoy the episode.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene, and tonight we're going to be talking about cut flowers. As someone who got into the world of plants and horticulture because I love flowers, this is a topic dear to me because I have to have my flowers, and people love bouquets of flowers, making your own. So joining me is a horticulturalist from the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens, is Wyatt Emig. And he's the perfect person because he is going to be teaching and leading a workshop on this towards the end of the month. And we'll get more details on that. But Wyatt, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Marlene.
And you said it was a crazy day at work, and you're still at the Botanic Gardens. Now, most people, I'm sure you hear this all the time, is when you're out working and people just like, oh, you have the best job. You're so lucky. And it's true. We do have the best job, but it can be quite draining. What did you do today? Why was today just so crazy?
Yeah. So I get that question a lot, and I love my job so much. I love gardening, but it can be stressful. It can be very busy some days. At the beginning of the week, I was told that I was supposed to make some floral arrangements this evening for the California Coastal Commission, who's having a banquet tonight in the garden. And I figured I would start them after my lunch today.
Oh no!
So I told myself I would start them around 1:30. And then another employee that wanted to help ended up having to do some training. So I didn't get started with them until about 2:30. And I had to do only three very large arrangements for centerpieces. So I got started late and I was running around the garden, and it's been quite warm on the coast these days. I mean, today it was in the high 60s, I would say. So as I'm picking, things are wilting. I'm trying to get them in the shade, get them in the room where I'm working to build them. And it took me a little bit longer than I expected. It's been a little while since I've been harvesting flowers to start arranging. So just kind of feeling that out and getting the season started, making some arrangements here. But that was my day. It got quite busy. So.
Yeah. And most people are like, well, that just sounds like fun. But when literally your work is facing someone on a table and that's what they're looking at, you know, and that's the thing, is everything always starts sounding like, oh, I'll just, grab these flowers. And then you're like, no, that's not the color I thought was going to go. Yeah. And then they start wilting on you. And, I think a lot of people listening, probably when you said it was getting warm along the coast, it was 68, probably just made a noise, but we'll leave that out. I mean, let's just say Mendocino has wonderful weather, Yeah. But 68 is warm for you guys this time of year.
It is quite.
So, I just wanted to hear, because you're like, oh, today was just so, and, it's like, oh, I wonder what's going on. Because I'm a nosy person. So speaking of nosy, I also like to hear how people get to where they're at. And, some people born knowing they wanted to work with plants, knowing they wanted to work with flowers. Other people just discovered it later on in life or one class. How did your journey, lead you to where you're at now?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Pennsylvania.
Oh.
I just moved to California. It'll be a year next month in August.
Oh, wow. Welcome.
Still very, very new to California. But I grew up on a small farm. We raised some beef cows that my parents we would harvest the meat, and we had a small family garden. My grandma would grow different things. I would. And I always enjoyed just being outside and growing seeds and watching them grow. And we would grow a couple acres of sweet corn. And in the fall, I just remember harvesting the sweet corn with my family and just canning it and having a great time and just always enjoying our time outside and spending time together. And it always made me really happy. And then when I was 15, about the age of 15, I started telling my parents I wanted to build a greenhouse, and I started like buying tons of seeds and growing them under plastic and starting a big garden with them. And they thought I was crazy growing 20 zucchini plants because,
Yeah.
who needs 20 zucchini plants? All the neighbors are growing zucchini as well. So you end up just tossing a few of them, which is totally fine. It goes right into the compost. But from there, I've always known that I wanted to work with plants, and I didn't quite know how I was going to work with plants. When I was a senior in high school, I was thinking that I would graduate and go to a four-year university. But I ended up applying to a 2-year professional horticulture program at Longwood Gardens.
Oh,
So
you did
I was,
Longwood.
yes. So I spent 2 years studying in a fully paid for accredited program for 2 years and living on property at Longwood. I worked in all the different areas of the garden. So I worked with aquatic plants. I worked in, the conservatory, planting displays. I worked outdoors with perennials. I was pruning. And then I worked in research. I worked in the tissue culture lab for a short period. And the best part about those 2 years at Longwood was just meeting people, other interns from many different countries, from France and Singapore and South Africa. And it was the best 2 years of my life, one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And that's where it just like took off, realizing that there's a lot of really cool plant people out there, and also a lot of really cool and interesting plants that people just don't know about. And I've always I love teaching people. And after being at Longwood and finding out about all these amazing plants, it just like the passion took off, and I've been never looking back, just keep going forward. And it's been great. And I graduated last July and wanted to do something different, wanted to be somewhere new. And one of my mentors was like, there's a job at the Mendocino Coast Botanical Garden in California. And I was like, I'll look it up online. And it looked beautiful. It looked amazing. So I applied. I got a job offer and I flew out here. It was my first time flying on a plane. I'm only 21.
Okay.
So I got on a plane, flew to San Francisco, driving up the coast. Everything's dead, in a drought. In July, it's like everything's brown. And I'm like, what am I doing? There's going to be no plants. This garden's going to be, I wasn't expecting much. But the second I walked into this garden, it is truly a gem on the coast, as many people say. It is a magical place. The people that work here, the volunteers, the community, the plants are absolutely amazing. And this has been like an even better year. Like, I'm very happy to be part of this garden. And yeah, like I said, I've always enjoyed gardening, and I don't know what the future holds, but the future is exciting. I'm very excited for whatever happens next.
That's amazing you got to do Longwood, because I've even thought, I'm like, maybe I could just go back and do it for fun. I want to do it. It just sounds like, and then when you said you got to do tissue culture, now I'm really like, my interest is piqued, because I just started a tissue culture lab at my house. So we'll have to talk behind the scenes.
That's awesome.
But yeah, Longwood definitely fast tracks you to be an expert and get that experience. But you were growing up gardening, so you have definitely, the background in it. And Mendocino, if people have never been there or not even been to that region, I mean, it's on the coastal bluffs of Northern California, and absolutely magical. And the weather, you can't really beat the weather for gardening, because it's almost the same temperature year round, which is, well, I guess in the summer, like you said, warm is 68, and then it does get chilly in the winter, and a lot of, obviously coastal fog influences. But, when my plants are struggling here in Central California, you go there and you see your dahlias, and they're huge and gorgeous.
Yep.
And I get jealous.
Oh, yeah.
So what is your area that you're working in is cut flowers?
So I'm the horticulturalist here, and I actually manage the organic vegetable garden.
Oh,
But I also
okay.
take care of the organic vegetable garden, some medicinal and edible herb sections. I have about 23 different fruit trees, like apple trees, pears, some figs, kiwis. Take care of the cut flower garden, and I also care for some carnivorous plants, some Sarracenia, some some sundews, and some other little things in the garden as well.
So you're all over the place.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
Whenever I need help in the rose garden, like this past winter, I was pruning roses, and I'm glad that I can be a part of all of that as well. But my main area is the vegetable garden and cut flowers.
Got it. So you are teaching a cut flower course at the end of this middle of this month. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I'll be teaching a class here at the garden on the 23rd of July, July 23rd. The basics of cut flower gardening, from the beginning of seeding and starting your cut flower garden to harvesting and arranging, all of the steps.
That's fun. I love arranging flowers. I'm not great at it. Mine are always very natural bouquets, just in the garden bouquets. But let's
I love
talk a little bit about cut flowers. And of course, everything starts with the soil. And then it starts with planning on what you're growing. So how would you describe the soil there? How did you guys prep the soil? Did you add anything to the soil, or just go
Yeah,
through the process of how you started for this year?
yeah. So I didn't do much to the soil this year because I'm fairly new to
Mhm.
this property. So I will be taking a soil test next spring
Mm.
and getting the results, and then amending from there. But currently, I'm not adding anything at all. I'm just compost. I just add our own compost from the property that we make ourselves. So any of the green and brown material from the entire property goes into windrows. They're turned. It takes about 6 weeks for the compost to break down and be used in the garden. That's all I'm using currently. I'm not fertilizing with any other organic fertilizers. In my vegetable garden beds, I'm amending with some other amendments based off of a soil test that I just got done. But currently, we have really good topsoil, well draining soil, and they haven't had any difficulties growing cut flowers in the past. But I do plan on getting a soil test next spring. But currently, I'm just using compost, and that seems to be doing just fine.
Where are you getting your soil tests done?
We sent soil tests to, it's called Waypoint Analytical, and I believe it's out of Virginia,
Okay.
which is a long way to send a soil sample away. And I recently just got another one done locally, and I think it was called Timberleaf. Timberleaf, maybe Southern California, I believe.
Okay. And you just literally just send them, they just say,
Yep.
here, send vials of soil, and then they test for all the macro and micronutrients, or
Correct. So I just send a small sample of soil. It has to be a certain weight, and it has
Mhm.
to be dry. So I take the sample from one general location, but like multiple different areas within that location. Package it and send it away, and they test for all the macro and micronutrients. And then they also send recommendations. So you have to put down what you're looking to grow, and then they send recommendations to add. And I don't know if you've looked at many soil tests, but they're kind of difficult to read sometimes. So we've had a few people look at them and kind of read them to us, which is helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
So what did the vegetable one come back? Was anything glaring?
No, like nitrogen is very high all the time because we use our own compost here. That's not an issue. But some things we had were, it was lacking calcium and phosphorus. So I was adding oyster shell for calcium, and then green sand for phosphorus. And then I also add the kelp meal for like some macronutrients, and some beneficial like microbes and things in there as well. And that's about it. We have very, very good soil here on the coast. I've been in many different gardens, and like personal home gardens and gardens that I've maintained, and the garden soil here is very, very nice soil.
Yeah, and I should point out, because my big thing for right now, it's blossom end rots occurring a lot, and I'm trying to tell most people don't have a lack of calcium, but I always say, unless you're along the coast and in sandy soils, and you are along the coast, and you said you had fast draining soil, so you're probably more definitely on the sandy side of it. So
Yeah,
that's the exception where you have to actually add the calcium into it.
correct.
Yeah, interesting. That's just fascinating, because so many people do want to get a soil test. And, I always tell them, sort of, if you know what type of soil you have and you've gardened one season, you sort of know, but, it doesn't hurt I don't know how much it costs. I haven't really ever sent out a soil test because I'm always sort of just going off of um, like adding compost, adding to get macro micronutrients in. Um, but it's not a bad idea, especially if you're going to go to the trouble of putting in an extensive garden, or you've had issues and you just can't quite figure it out, or if it's in a new area. But you haven't had problems in the cut flower area, and I'm sure it's because just compost is added all the time.
Yeah, I mean, our compost is pretty rich compost. If you use too much of it, it can be a bad thing here. And that's all I used this year. And we're a few months in now. We're into July already.
Yeah.
Wow. And the cut flowers are looking great. Everything's growing and filling in nicely. So I'm not having any issues. But I would say anyone who's like starting their first cut flower garden or planning a cut flower garden, I feel like getting a soil test done just so you know what's happening in your soil is important. But also just like giving it a try on, adding those macronutrients and some other nutrients in compost isn't bad. It won't hurt at all. But I believe soil tests are an important thing. They're not too pricey. They're about $30. And then you can also find different people to read them to, because they are difficult to read.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. That's not bad. And, I'm sure sending them off isn't that expensive because it's dry soil. They don't need a lot. So, no, it's interesting. That's I like to hear differing peoples who do go about it a different way. So do you, there's no till, right? I imagine you guys don't till.
Nope, it's a no-till garden. So I practice some bio-intensive garden methods here. So I double dig and single dig my beds.
Okay.
No till.
Yeah. And the fun part is always deciding what you're going to plant, right? That's always, I mean,
it really
is getting the flowers and making bouquets is fun, but it's also like, it's plant people's shopping that they really like to do is for plants, and then planning the garden and looking at seed catalogs online or paper. And it's always like, ooh, what can I plant? And then usually are just like, you're like, okay, I got to cut this list down. So what were when did you start planning and ordering and getting seeds, and what were some of you just absolutely knew you wanted to have? What were some that are totally different than you've ever tried? Because being from Pennsylvania, there might be some different out here.
Yeah. So I started really early, around December into January. I spent a lot of time inside because it was fairly cold and rainy. So I started with making a crop schedule and figuring out what I wanted to grow and how long those plants were going to last in the garden. So I've been wanting to grow a lot of different things that I grew in Pennsylvania here, but Pennsylvania is very warm and it's hot and humid. So a lot of the ones I've been wanting to grow aren't doing the best here on the coast. Some of those are like zinnias. I tried growing them here. I'm growing them now. But with the fog in the summers, I get a lot of powdery mildew, and the buds don't last long at all. Some that are doing really well, I would say tons of amaranth. Have you heard of Ami?
Yes.
That is doing amazing, really, really well.
That was a weed in my previous garden. It was funny because it became such a weed, and I've been trying to get it to grow in my garden now. And it's sort of always just a secondary thought because I was sort of scared of it. And I'm like, well, I do want it. So I have some plants now, and I'm like, okay, I'm allowing you to reseed, because my garden, I don't do in rows. It's just sort of this big hodgepodge. But yeah, it's nice and airy, but it's funny how in some gardens things just reseed like crazy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And this year, because it is my first year here at the garden, I'm kind of starting slow. I have a lot of seeds that were collected last year that I'm using. Mm-hmm. So I'm using a lot of marigolds. A lot of the amaranth as well is hand collected from my volunteers. And then one that a lot of people don't use in arrangements, but I have enjoyed using is quinoa. I just think not pinching the quinoa, but letting it do its thing and getting really tall, 4 or 5 feet tall, and just using those beautiful crystally seed heads in the arrangements look amazing, I'd say.
Oh, interesting. I like that.
Yeah. And then the snapdragons do really great here, especially the tall varieties. The cool temperatures, year round are perfect for snapdragons because they don't like the heat. So they seem to be doing really well. And then just like a ton of annual reseeders that just reseed in the garden every year. A lot of Nigella, Cosmos, and Celosia will grow. Yeah, and then there is some perennials that I've been working with slowly, like some perennials that have already been in the garden, but in the future I do plan on like introducing some more because it is my first year. I'm just kind of starting slow, using the seeds that I have. Um,
Yeah, and that's what, people get seeds from their friends. They collect the seeds, or like you said, you just sort of let them reseed themselves. For
mhm.
new varieties, do you have like a source you like to go to, or does the garden have a source they like to go to?
Yeah,
Uh,
so there's four seed companies that the gardens seem to use the most. And these are ones that the previous gardener before me used a lot for ordering cut flower seeds and vegetable seeds. And those are like Baker Creek seeds, which I've had really good luck with cut flowers,
mhm.
but sometimes the vegetable seeds are a little mixed, especially the squashes.
Oh,
Um, but
throwing shade. No, just kidding.
and then a couple others are like adaptive seeds, which is another really good one. Territorial, which is local kind of in Oregon.
Mhm.
I had really good luck with them. I believe they were just purchased by a different seed company this year, maybe Johnny's.
Okay,
Um,
interesting.
they
Yeah.
have some really good varieties as well. And Seed Savers Exchange is another good one. Those are my four top seed companies that I seem to have really good luck with.
Yeah, those are
Um,
pretty much mine too. I think I throw in like Select Seeds there
okay.
is another one. But yeah, those are usually my go-to ones. And sometimes if I have a random one I'm trying to find or track down and someone's out of it, I'll just order it anywhere I could find it. Um, but yeah, and I don't know if you discovered this, but especially with the vegetables last year, I was telling people you better get on it because I never had a problem with seeds running out. And you're always like, oh, I'm going to order my tomato seeds and flower seeds, and they sold out way sooner because everyone started gardening. Well, people were gardening before the pandemic, but it really hit. Um, so it was like I made sure I ordered my seeds extra early just because I'm like, I want those seeds and I don't want them to be out.
Yeah, I was running a business previous to this job, and I was growing vegetable starts last spring, and I had the hardest time just getting like zucchini and cucumber seeds and tomato seeds very early on, like beginning of the year. It was very difficult then too. And this year, a lot of things ran out really fast as well.
Yeah.
So definitely recommend getting on that early this year as well.
What would you say is the percentage or the number of direct sowing versus starting in like cell trays, like in a greenhouse, or um, what is the majority? What is
I would I would say I've been doing probably 90% of the seeding I do is in cell trays
okay?
or redwood flats. And then the other, 10% I do just directly sowing. The reason I like to start seeds in the greenhouse and flats is it saves a little bit of water. Try not to use too much water. By planting those in those smaller trays, I'm watering like less area, less amount of space, and then when I'm directly sowing, I have to like water the entire bed. So it ends up saving a little bit of water because there's not much water here on the coast. And then I practice the biointensive garden methods with my vegetable gardens. So I also do that, kind of interpret that into my cut flower gardening as well.
Yeah, I usually do sell just because it's so much easier to sort of control. Because sometimes when you have these seeds, especially like marigolds, the snails and slugs or earwigs could wipe them out just when they're emerging before you even realize it. Some people are like, "Oh, my seeds never came up this year." Like they might be coming up, but they might be eaten before you even realize it. So I feel like you get the plants a little bit bigger, a little bit more robust, and you could see if any damage is going on. Um, Plus, if we get a heavy rain, sometimes the seeds could be washed down. So all of
Yeah.
a sudden you have these chunks and areas where there's a lot of plants coming up and there's a bare area. I don't know. For me, it's sort of more of a control thing where I could actually see them come up and I know, okay, this cell didn't come up. Or I put two seeds in a cell tray or a cell, and then I'm able to. So basically it's me just being a control freak when it comes to seedlings
No,
coming up.
I totally agree. I feel like it is nice to like have a control in like what's happening and how many seedlings you have to plan out this year, because I've definitely have directly sown some seeds this year, and I didn't have issues with slugs and earwigs in Pennsylvania on the East Coast. But here, the earwigs and slugs they eat everything.
Yeah.
Anything that comes up, they're there and eat it completely down. So I use these small redwood flats that maintenance for me will make these perfect screens that fit right on top, little lids for the flats, and it works out perfectly.
So
Keep the
they're
earwig.
made out of redwood or
Yeah, so we have these like about 4-inch deep redwood flats.
okay.
They're about 4 inches by 1.5 feet long, and then maybe a foot wide. And the reason we use the redwood is it's very porous, so the tray dries out evenly. Every time I water, it dries out evenly. It's amazing. I was very surprised by that when I moved here. And then also the redwood lasts quite a while because it's the rot resistant. It'll last 10 to 15 years, and then they start breaking down. So it's not like you're using plastic and purchasing plastic all the time. And I've really enjoyed using the redwood flats. They're sturdy. Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna have to send me a picture of them. I'd like to see, so I could maybe make some myself. So, because and then the plastic does break, and then gets weak, and you go to lift it and it breaks. Yeah. And I like the evening out, because you always have cells that get drier fast, and other ones stay wet.
Yeah, I was really surprised by how evenly these trays dried out. I wasn't sure at first because I've never grown like directly sowed seeds into a wooden flat before. I was very surprised by that.
Do you use bottom heat when you start your seeds?
Depending on what it is, I do have some heating mats that I use, but it depends on what it is that I'm growing.
Yeah, and usually they'll say like, I don't know if people read seed covers enough, but they're getting pretty good where they'll say, because some seeds need to be covered dark, others need light to germinate, and you don't want to cover them, or they're a tiny seed and they get buried too deep. I like to use vermiculite to cover any of my seeds that I start. To me, it's easier to apply on top of the seeds. It just goes on easier, holds a decent amount of moisture, but not so much that it's going to sort of rot out. I don't know. That's my go-to.
Yeah. I haven't used any vermiculite for seeding here, but I have in the past. But I have some actually that I didn't get to use any this year. Everything is ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, but standard seed starting mix works. But I always tell people, don't dig up the soil from your back garden. Don't use that. Don't try to stick that in cells, or even just potting soil, because it's just way too porous and too uneven. You're trying to put in these small cells where you need just uniformity and moisture holding.
Correct.
So don't try to use what you have. I mean, take a little bit of extra money to get some nice seed starting mix, because in the long run that'll help you. When did you start shopping in December?
Yeah, December, January, start shopping.
And then do you remember what was the first rounds of seeds that you sowed? What was the earliest ones that went in?
The earliest rounds, I don't have my list with me now, but I'd say, I probably didn't start the majority of my cut flowers until like mid-April into May.
Okay.
It takes a long time for the soil to warm up here on the coast.
Yeah.
So the soil temperature stays, in the mid-50s, or like even lower than that actually. So it takes a while for that soil temperature to warm up. So I started a lot of my seeds probably mid-April into May, and then I covered all of my beds with Agribon or Remay.
Okay.
I don't know if people worked with that before, but basically it's like a white mesh, and you can get different percentages that allow different amounts of light and airflow through them. And I just use little wire hoops and use landscape stakes to stake down the fabric, just like plastic almost. And that heats up the soil temperature at least 7 to 10 degrees warmer underneath that than the normal temperature outside. And then it helped get the soil temperature up so I could plant earlier. We have warmer falls here on the coast, so a lot of the gardeners here won't plant until like mid-May to the end of May. but I got started really early this year. I was so ready for it. So I was like, I'm gonna use the Agribon and get the soil temperature up and start early. So I would say, April into May, I started the majority of my seeds for cut flowers.
Interesting. Yeah, you were like, I am ready to plant. How did you? So you literally did you measure the temperature of the soil? Did you have a soil probe?
I didn't test it once I put the cover on, but I tested it before, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was definitely pretty cold. And then as soon as I put the Agribon on, I put the plants in actually, and they kind of got stunted a little at first, but within just 2 weeks, I noticed a huge difference. They took off. I did the same thing with a lot of my vegetables this year, especially like Romanesco zucchini, and I had zucchinis at the end of May. I was harvesting zucchinis. It was amazing.
Wow, that's early.
It was very,
when did your tomatoes go in?
So, and that's another thing. I can't grow tomatoes here on the coast.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
They don't ripen. So I do grow a couple in the greenhouse, but they look pretty bad. They don't look very happy because it's foggy. So they get, botrytis and they just powdery mildew specifically, and they just don't look good.
Yeah, that's okay. Everyone wants to grow what they can't grow, but really, I mean, look what else you could grow. So yeah. I always tell people when I was up at Orcas Island, I'm riding my bike and I almost crashed because I'm like, what is that little greenhouse? What is then when it dawned on me, they had their tomato under like plastic. I almost crashed because I'm like, I can't even imagine living somewhere where it was like so cold in the summer or such a short season, but Mendocino's like 2.5 hours away from me. So I don't think people realize the amount of microclimates California has. Where
just here on the coast.
Just along the coast. Yeah. But you could grow zucchini. So I guess no melons for you either.
No melons.
No melons. But do you grow peas during this time, or are you still?
Yeah,
okay.
A lot of peas. I can grow them really late into the fall as well when it gets cooler. But all plants have their on and off seasons, and I would say this year the peas are not too happy with the warm temperatures we've been having.
Yeah.
The first batch this spring did really well, and I've just noticed that with the heat they just don't seem to like that, depending on the variety.
Yeah, we don't grow peas in Central Valley in the summer, so that's why I was asking. They're pretty sensitive to heat.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Are you growing sweet peas?
I am growing sweet peas. I grew sweet peas actually planted sweet peas last fall and had them in the ground all winter and harvested them this spring. And it was the best patch of sweet peas I've ever grown.
Okay. So that's along the lines of pretty much everywhere else. Like here, mine reseed. So, and because like I said, it's just, I'll let them do their thing. They'll pop up in the fall. I think sweet peas are one where a lot of people miss the timing on it because in fall, you're not thinking necessarily about flowers, but they do best when you plant them either by seed, usually by seed, and give them all winter to grow. And mine sort of are just done by, I want to say like at the very latest, like mid-May, then the heat comes and just wipes them out.
Yep.
Okay.
I would say
the same.
I would say about pretty spot on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you could eke out a little bit more because you're a little bit cooler.
Yeah. By that point, I started another round, but the second round, I guess I was just experimenting because it's just learning here on the coast. So I started a second round, but they don't seem to be doing well at all.
Okay. But you did try to eke out a second round just because you're a little bit cooler. So as far as your perennials go, I know you have beautiful dahlias there. Are you using those as cut flowers? Or did you incorporate those into bouquets?
Yeah, so the bouquets that I made today, I used the dahlias from the Dahlia garden, which we have a beautiful selection of dahlias. But here in the garden that I manage, I have some dahlias planted that I use in my arrangements. Last fall, I dug out all of the dahlias that I had, and the nursery is currently propagating them. And then I'm supposed to be getting some back for this fall to plant again for next year. But I do plan on incorporating more dahlias in the future because I've noticed how well they do here. So Currently not very many, but a few, and in the
Okay.
future, hopefully even more.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure because that is a great well, some of them, the big ones don't. It's the smaller like pom-pom ones do better. The large ones, I don't know in your experience, do they hold up great in a bouquet?
They it depends on the variety, to be honest. I've definitely used some varieties of large pom-pom ones that
Uh-huh.
or like larger spider ones that like do really well in arrangements. And then I've used ones that don't last very long at all.
Okay. So I guess it's just very dependent on the variety.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. So I guess my big problem with a lot of my quote cut flowers is floppage. The
Mhm.
plants flop. Dahlias flop. Zinnias get big and flop. Do you stake? Do you control? Do you prune? What do you go through and do through the season to keep them a little bit more tidy?
Yeah, so because it is a cut flower garden, I do a fair amount of staking. I just use the metal tea stakes,
Okay.
or not the metal stakes, which last many years until they rust down, and those seem to work the best. I don't try to hide them because it is a cut flower garden, so there is supposed to be staking. So I make the stakes visible for people to see, so they get ideas for their home. And I just use regular twine, biodegradable twine that I get at the hardware store, and I've experimented with some different types of staking, some pretty basic ties. But I do plan on experimenting with that some more and trying to find my own way that that works the best for me. And then, throughout the entire season, you're constantly editing and, deadheading and pieces that are dying and thinning and opening it up for more airflow. So, through the entire season, especially here with the fog, I'm going to be editing and just removing things as the season goes on. But definitely a lot of staking, especially with the dahlias and the perennials. A lot of those like to lodge. Um, but I recommend like using the metal tea stakes. They last long. They last the longest. And if you're using a home garden and you want it to look for the aesthetics, make it look nice, the wooden stakes also look very nice with the burlap, or like the burlap.
If you want that look. But yeah, metal stakes. And I think some people make the error of getting too small of stakes. They're like,
Yeah,
oh, this stake will work. And then you have the stake leaning along with the whole entire plant.
correct.
So you need to get a little beefier stakes because some of these plants are going to get big and you're trying to control them before they get to that real flopping stage.
Correct. And the timing is another really good thing. Whenever you're putting stakes out, especially with like larger, taller cut flowers, especially sunflowers and other things, you really got to get stakes in early, because they just take off. And then you really have to catch up with staking. It's easier to get the string in between the plants before they get tall. So I've noticed, I try not to slack on staking, get it done instantly. As soon as I plant, I like to get the stakes and twine up and then let the plants grow in between the twine instead of having to maneuver around the plants and breaking stems. So time
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
important as well.
Yeah. You mentioned sunflowers. So you do grow sunflowers.
I do grow sunflowers. The
Oh,
majority of the sunflowers are for the birds because
okay.
they really enjoy them. But I do harvest a few for the cut flowers for the
Okay.
rain.
Yeah.
So
And I grow a lot of sunflowers and then I end up not having to plant them in a lot of areas because they just reseed. But I let most of them just go for the birds as well. But I they're fun to buy seeds because even though people are like, oh, aren't they just yellow? No, there's so many variations of yellow. And then there's one, I can't remember the name. It looks like teddy bear, and I've grown the teddy bear one, but the teddy
okay.
bear one looks like it has from what I recall, it just has one flower. And I found another multi-headed one that looks like teddy bear and it reseeded and it has that look where it looks like it has all these petals in the middle, so you don't really actually see quote any of the seeds. I got to track down the name of that because people ask, and I'm horrible at
Definitely look into that.
organizing.
Yes, I want to know that name. I love the teddy bear ones. I love the one large head with the, very frizzy,
Hmm.
fluffiness to it. But that's interesting. I love that one.
Yeah, and I think I got it from Baker Creek Seed, so I do need to just easily look that up. I think it was from there, but I liked it because, and some people were like, "Oh, I didn't know sunflowers could be branching." Yeah, get the branching ones because you get a lot more bang for your buck. Yeah, it's fun to grow the mammoth ones when they're super tall, but you get one big, large flower, and that's it. But I love the branching ones because you could get lots of bouquets from it.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you do about weeds?
A lot of people in their cut flower gardens use like hardware cloth or a lot of mulches, but I don't use any of those. I just hand weed.
Okay.
I think it looks the most presentable to me personally. But I have used different types of clothing in the past, and they all work very well. But personally, I just, for the labor intensive, I think it's easier just for me to weed and keep after the weeds and not let really weedy weeds reseed and just keep after it. I have a large group of volunteers here as well that work with me. So it's easy to keep after the weeds here.
Yeah, that's nice having the volunteers.
Yeah.
So, I see a lot of like cut flower farms. And I know a few cut flower farmers, and because we have problematic weeds. One of our big problematic weeds here is called bindweed, where it's a creeper and it's a crawler. So it's a vine, and it'll vine up your plants. And it's a perennial, and it's almost impossible to pull the taproot out. If you don't get it when it's young, the taproot, literally, I saw a picture of someone's holding it. It looks like, I think it was like a 4-foot deep taproot by like 2 feet wide. They get massive if you let the roots grow. So you could just keep pulling it out, and it reseeds. So that is a problem. So I know a lot of them will lay down, the fabric, the water permeable fabric, and plant on that just because they're having to, it's their livelihood. But for me, like, heavy mulch, or just going out and keeping on the weeds, have your coffee mug in one hand, just going through and weeding, or a hula hoe. Hula hoe is your best friend for in between.
Hula hoes are our best friends.
Yeah.
Our best friends. I mean, why would you not have one?
Exactly. I know. When people like, at the students, I'm like, oh, go, you get the hula. They're like, the what? I'm like, oh, let me show you. Let me show you. And then I do tell them, I'm like, you're decapitating the weeds. It sounds violent, but yes, we're killing the weeds this way. But yeah, and I'm sure you tell people the number one thing is don't let them go to seed. Don't let them go to seed.
Correct. We have a lot of wild radish here on the coast, and they seem to grow everywhere. And that's one thing I'm constantly like, the ones on the outside of the fence, string trimming them before they get to seed, and then also like pulling all the seedlings in the vegetable garden and the cut flower garden all the time.
Yeah,
keeping after, especially like the fireweed too, making sure that we get those out before they go to seed as well. Yeah, that's
the key. Sometimes at work, if we don't have time, or it's a big weed and we don't have time to go, try to pull it, we'll just walk by and snap off the flower just to prevent it from going to seed right there until we could come back and yank it out. But a lot of times if your soil's nice, you could just pull it out. But yeah, if it's like a big gnarly weed or something, we're just like, cut the flowers off so it doesn't go to seed, because in case we forget.
I do the same thing.
There you go. So you mentioned pests and snails and slugs. And I don't actually have a problem with snails and slugs, and I think it's because we have so many wild turkeys. And as much as they dig around early before things are planted, they, I think, just pull everything out of the ground. So I don't know, people with chickens don't have snail and slug problems, but I don't have a problem with snails and slugs. But you said that was one problem, and you were mentioning the powdery mildew. And I imagine because you have like a organic garden, and probably like most organic gardeners, and, having a diverse garden, that you really don't do anything for any pests.
Yeah, I don't have a very big pest issue. The only thing I have is the birds, snails, and slugs. So I use the covers on the flats of the seedlings in the spring. And then I also use the same hoops that I use for the agribon, the mesh that I use. I use the same hoops for netting when I first plant lettuce and cabbage and broccoli, and some cut flowers the sparrows like to eat as well. So that's how I prevent those guys. Another thing is the gophers, gophers. It's kind of sad. Like, you have this massive, the Mexican sunflower, Tithonia, you have like a massive one, and then it just falls over. And
it's like, gone. Yeah.
what the heck? And I didn't have gophers to deal with in Pennsylvania. So here I've learned how to trap them. So I trap them quite often, and then I usually take the body and usually feed it to the owls or hawks. Usually eat it by morning, which is pretty cool. Just feeding the wildlife.
There you go. Yeah.
But other than that, I really don't have a ton of issues. I don't know if you've personally been to the botanical garden, but the vegetable garden and cut flower garden have this massive diversity of perennials and rhododendrons, trees and shrubs surrounding it.
Yes.
So I have a lot of birds. Like in the morning, the finches are sitting on the tips of the apple trees, just plucking away at all the aphids and mites. And then, there's frogs and all different kinds of amphibians that are just like hopping around and eating all the bugs. And then, a lot of these plants are host plants for beneficial insects that are coming in and feeding on the bad bugs. Occasionally I have issues with some aphids on some really young seedlings that I'm starting in the greenhouse. And I usually just use some soapy water, or I have volunteers squish them with their fingers. But I don't spray anything. It's all organic, and I don't have many pest issues, which is very impressive. I've been to quite a few gardens who have some pretty bad pest issues, but here, and I think the weather has a lot to do with it as well. It's pretty cool and mild, so it helps too.
Yeah, no, I just like to hear, because I mean, I'm assuming I always know the answer. But I always I think the more people who hear it, because they'll hear it from me, they might hear from someone else saying, oh, I don't have pest problems. When we say I don't have pest problems, it doesn't mean I don't have pests. They're just not a problem. They're not to a point where it's detrimental to plants. And if I see it going there, like you said, you just have people squish them or soap spray, or if it's an established plant, a hose blast. I know one pest that is a problem, and it white flies. I don't know if you have a problem with white flies.
I do not. I was really surprised by that. I thought I would have issues with white flies in the greenhouse on like pepper plants or cucumbers. I don't at all.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably where you're at. We're hot and dry. So I think it might be a hot, dry thing. They do like greenhouses, but usually that's because there's not the predatory insects as readily available in a greenhouse. But I'm still it's like, even with certain whiteflies, they're annoying because you go through, if you just get them towards the end of the season when things are dying off, that's okay. A plant can handle it. So yeah, there generally tends to be, like you said, gophers. That's my pest. Have you experimented with, just applying beneficial nematodes for just to increase?
I personally haven't ever.
Okay.
I do have issues with some damage on some carrots. Last fall I did, but I forget. I think it was maybe a nematode that was eating the carrot actually. And in the past, I was looking back at records, and they did apply some beneficial nematodes to attack them. But I personally haven't since I've been here, but it might be something that would need done in the future. But currently I haven't had any issues with those.
It sounds like you haven't had to apply them. I'm just curious because it's the first year I applied them last year for my cucumber beetles, and I don't have cucumber beetles right now, but it's always like, I never had cucumber beetles before. So was it that season? Last year was last year was probably the worst. And it was, I don't know if it was the first year you were gardening. It was probably the worst year for gardeners last year. I mean, I had tomato experts who said, oh God, it was the worst year. My father-in-law, who's been gardening for, 60 years in San Jose, said it was the worst year. Just people like, oh my gosh, it was the most horrific year. So everything was sort of out of whack, and things are still out of whack. Just, climate change, drought,
Correct.
fires, the smoke. So I'm always one of those. And I'm like, well, was it the beneficial nematodes, or was it just a coincidence I had cucumber beetles last year and things took care of them? But, it's sort of like all these new beneficials are coming on the market, and it's sort of fun to play with them. I just started adding biochar to my soil too.
Okay.
We'll see. The results aren't in yet. So
I'm curious. Yeah. So there's I've noticed, I've only been gardening. I'm still very young.
Yes, you're very young.
I've noticed growing up in PA, and I did run a business for a little while on my parents' property selling, annual and veggie starts. And there were on and off years. Some years, the tomatoes did really well. Some years they did terrible. And then some years aphids were really bad, or sometimes blossom end rot was really bad. And I feel like a lot of these things have, same thing with apples. Some years are good, some years are bad. Some years the black spot is bad, some years it's not. And I do think that comes and goes with the weather and the climate as well. But I think that's the exciting part. It's like, this year, are the peas going to grow or are they not going to grow? So it's like, you're not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still amazed. I'm still amazed when I plant a seed and it comes up. It's like I should know better. I mean, that's why I'm always ending up with more plants. And I think that's a lot of gardeners. It's like you plant them and you're like, because, even though we know we've been doing this, it's just still amazing when they come up. You're like, wow, that is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I would say starting seeds, I don't know, that's definitely where like my passion for growing plants started. Just like starting that first tomato seed as a young kid, just like, it's so exciting, and now I can't stop. And I won't stop.
Yeah, then then you do all your zucchinis. Then you have way too many zucchinis and you have to give them away because you're like, well, I wasn't sure, or I want to try this one and I want to try that one.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, what is a vegetable that we'll talk vegetables too. What is a vegetable that you really want to try? What is one of your vegetables that's your nemesis? And same thing with flowers. What's a cut flower you want to try, and what's one that is just a pain in the butt?
A vegetable I want to try. I don't know. I hear a lot of locals having really good luck growing different tomato varieties. Let's be variety specific, like growing really, really good varieties of tomatoes here on the coast and having really good luck. I can't tell you a specific variety, but there's a few that I've been looking at that I really want to grow tomatoes here.
Okay. It's a challenge now.
Tomatoes.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, the next few years, I'm gonna try to grow a really good tomato.
Okay.
And I'm gonna make it. A vegetable that's challenging. Let me think about this. They say every good gardener can grow a really good onion. And I've grown onions twice here on the coast, and I kind of failed both times. And now I'm like, am I a gardener? Am I good at this anymore? Yeah, onions. I've always struggled with onions, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I think the timing, especially here on the coast, is very, very important. And for me, it's just gardening is like a big experiment. So I'm gonna try them at a different time next year. Same thing with my spinach.
Your what?
With my spinach as well.
Yeah.
I started them maybe too late, and they all bolted instantly. So, onions are one of those things that I haven't mastered yet.
Well, it's funny because my father-in-law says the same thing, and I just mentioned how long he spent gardening. He's like, for whatever reason, and they are very like day length sensitive. So there's short length, there's day, long days, and now there's medium days, and yeah, I think everyone has a strange, and it's some of those winter crops, some of those bolting crops. You could read everything about what you're supposed to do, and literally I'll have like a broccoli planted the exact same time from the same pack. One will bolt and one won't.
Yes.
It's like or someone will send me a picture and say the same thing, and I'm like, I can't tell you. Plants, genetics. It's like people. Why someone gets sick, exact same. Sometimes you just don't know. And that's the challenge, and that's the fun. It could be frustrating, but you just have to learn from it. And that's it. Every season is just like new and different. But yeah, see, you can't grow tomato. You're told you can't grow tomatoes, and now you're going to try to grow tomatoes. So see, it's the challenge.
Yeah. And everyone tells me, my boss is like, you can't grow tomatoes. You just can't, Wyatt. And I'm like, but look, we're like 5,000 feet from the ocean. Just a mile inland, they're growing some really nice tomatoes. And another thing, corn as well. I just grew a variety called sugar buns, and it should get 5 feet, 5.5 feet tall, and it only grew like 4 feet. But I hand pollinated it, and I ate two cobs off of it last week, and they were delicious. They weren't as full as I wanted them to be, but it was still good, and it was worth it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
Determined to grow good corn and tomatoes.
Oh, I'm going to say though that kudos to you, because if someone picked me up and told me, say, hey, you have to go garden in Pennsylvania now for your job, I would be scary. I mean, one of my friends, Fred Hoffman, he is like always says gardening is local. So if someone asks you a question or how to grow something, you move to a completely different climate, it's going to be could be completely different.
Agreed.
So good for you for adjusting pretty fast to the the new climate in the new area, and everything's different. So yeah, you sort of extrapolate all the information and you tweak it, but it's still completely new and different. So
Totally agree. I totally agree. I get questions from guests all the time, and they ask, they're like, "What am I doing wrong?" And I'm like, "I." It's so hard to tell you what you're doing wrong because you live 3 hours north, or you live 3 hours inland. You live in Southern California.
mhm.
It's. I cannot tell you. I'm not 100% sure. It's it is very local.
Yes. Yeah, people send
Local.
me questions and they forget to say where they're from. And I
Yeah.
sort of get, like the viewers for the show I do covers the mountains of, the Sierras, but and then the Central Valley, which is totally different. So I always have to ask, are you in the valley or are you up in the mountains? Because that's a world of difference as far
Yep.
as, and then, of course we all know it's the soils and everything. Um, so okay, just real quick, because I was like, what flower would you
A
like to
flower.
grow? Or one that really just or plant that is your nemesis?
Um, what I'd really like to grow is maybe like try echinacea here on the coast.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, I know it might rot during the winters because it's really wet. Our soil holds a lot of moisture in the winter.
Mm.
And it gets powdery mildew. So maybe try echinacea. Maybe that's something that I want to give a try because it would, if it worked, it would be great for cut flowers in the
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah. I could see some of the more quote fancy new hybrids, but the good old standard purple one or even the white one, I could see having, that growing but the powdery mildew, yeah. Like here I tell powdery mildew people, oh, you're going to get in spring, but when it gets really hot, it's really dry. It's going to dissipate and go away. Not so much along the coast. So,
Not at all.
yeah.
I don't think there's any flowers that I dislike at this point right now. Like the like cut flowers. I don't think I've found that one that I've been like, I can't do this.
Okay. Have you tried Lysianthus?
Lysianthus, I haven't. I have
Okay.
not.
Yeah. I used to think I couldn't grow that here. And then there's a flower farmer up by me and they're growing it. So I found some old seeds and I started them. And then I just got sidetracked and didn't move them outside. So
I tried them, but they like the cold, don't they? Like to be cooler, correct?
see, that's what I thought. And then people are like, oh no, I talked to a flower farmer in, is it Missouri? She's growing them in Missouri. And then the flower farmer I know is like 20 minutes from me. And, it's 100 degrees and they're growing them. So
Oh,
I know that's where sometimes you hear these things and you just think, well, I can't. And sometimes I think when people come from a background of maybe not being in the business so long, or maybe they're just more experimental than me because I'm like, oh no, there's no way. Um, so next year I'm going to do it. This year I know I could germinate the seed. I just need to be on top of it a little bit better. So we'll see. We'll see. But to me, it's always fun because I haven't grown that flower, so it'd be a new one for me. But
yeah, I'm gonna look into it. I'm gonna
yeah,
definitely check it out now.
yeah,
Any ideas are great. So,
yeah. Well, this is. I mean, I could talk to you forever about
yeah.
gardening and stuff. So is the class full?
The class is not full yet. I top it off at 15. I think I'm at 11
Okay.
currently.
So if I
Um,
post this soon, people could still sign up for it.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. So how could they find out more information about you? Do you have any social stuff and then the gardens?
Yeah, if you want to hear more about the class or sign up, if you just go to the website on the right-hand side, you'll see it's at the top of the list. It says a cut flower workshop by Wyatt Emig. You can just find it right there on the website. And if you want to see my gardening life, my Instagram is just Wyatt Emig. Just Wyatt Emig is my Instagram handle. It's WYATTEMIG, and I just post pictures of frogs and redwood trees and flowers, everything that's happening in the garden. My volunteers harvesting produce. It's all great. And yeah,
Okay.
that's It's the
Um,
best way to see what's happening.
yeah, and I'll post all the social for the botanical gardens too, because I know they have the Instagram and the Facebook, and I'll
Yes.
put their
Yeah.
their website. So I guess I'll leave it with, how do you like California? Where have you visited in California so far? And what's your favorite thing to do now in California besides gardening?
um, I absolutely love it here. It's definitely like the happiest I've been in a long time. It's a beautiful place. I have some of the bestest friends here. It's a small town in Fort Bragg, but I
Mhm.
definitely have found a group that I really enjoy spending my time with. It's great. I've been all the way up into Oregon, to the northern part of California, over to Shasta, done some camping. And when I drove across the country, I drove into LA and then drove the entire coast north. Spent a lot of time down near San Francisco, and yeah, just like driving up and down the coast. I love tide pooling and checking out all the cool things you find out there,
Yeah,
and hiking in the redwoods. The
yeah.
majority of my time, I'm on my bike on my weekends. I like to go camping and just doing everything outside.
Are you getting
Great.
into mushroom hunting?
Yeah, so this past fall, I've never gone mushroom hunting before, but this past fall I kind of got into it a little, but I'm excited for this fall. So I started collecting some boletes, which are the easy ones, the king boletes, and I made this huge pot of soup, and it was delicious. It was amazing, and then some candy caps and other
Oh,
little
yeah.
little. But it's amazing the diversity of mushrooms here. I'm amazed by all of
I
them.
think that's the peak area. That's why I asked, because it's that the coastal forest there where it's just moist, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I love everything about the coast. The temperature is perfect. I live in this cute little tiny house in the redwoods, and I just bike on the paved path along the ocean. And this morning I got up really early and went tide pooling at sunrise because it was a full moon last night. And I just love seeing starfish and octopus and all this cool stuff I find. And so it's amazing. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful, special place for sure.
It really is a beautiful, special place. I mean, and throughout the whole entire world. I mean, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful places, but it definitely is up there as far as beauty goes. So,
Agreed.
well, good for you. So this was fun. I'm glad we connected, and I'll post this so people, hopefully a few more spots in that in the class, and hopefully they follow you on Instagram. And until next time, everyone, happy gardening.